This is our second session. Yesterday, I talked about what makes us humans special. In today's session, I want to talk about where does this specialty come from? Is it in our genes? Is it in our culture? Is it in our stars? Is it in our inheritance? So these are vital questions. And these questions have been asked at least for 5,000 years. And we still continue to ask. And we still don't know the full answer to them. And today I will explore with you some of the questions and some of the answers. And because of the discoveries in genetics in the last 100 years, particularly the structure of DNA molecule in 1953, which is about 60 years ago, all these questions have become more complex. So I wish to share with you some of these. They are vital questions because they have a lot of relevance in education, in our system of justice and courts, in our systems of creativity, in our systems of science, because they touch upon all aspects of our life. So I start with that idea. So question is, who are we? Why are we the way we are? Two questions. The idea of nature and nurture. What is nurture? Nature, we think we know what is nature is. We still, I often ask, what is nature? Because nature is being explored constantly. We still know a good deal, we know a good deal about nature, but we still don't know a whole lot about it. And that's the discoveries in science that goes on about nature. But the question of nurture, what is nurture? Is it our upbringing? It is our thoughts? Is it our schooling? Is it our religion? Is it our physical environment? Is it our social environment? All those are part of nurture. And so how they interact with each other, a very complex question. Makes it very complex because they do not interact in any linear way. There is not a linear mathematical equation. And so this is all comes under the rubric of nurture. So we talk about, these are words that are part of our common parlance in many societies. We talk of destiny. We talk of fate. We talk of stars, what stars we are born. Every newspaper, certainly in Canada and the Western world, has a little horoscope, or more like a horoscope. Every day it's published. The stars, what do the stars tell us about us? And we ask each other what star you were born in. So as though the stars decide our fate, our destiny. And then, of course, genes, the notion of genes, and the karma, the notion that comes from Indian religions, from Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism, Sikhism, this idea of karma. What decides for us what would happen to us? Oh, sorry. So there is a term used by one of the great financial wizards. He says, do some people win a womb lottery? Where are you born? Does that decide your fate? Are you born in Europe? Are you born in a poor country, or a country ridden with violence or tension? So is that who decides it? And what happens to you? Because depending on where you're born, your life unfolds differently. So is it some kind of lottery? And who draws the lottery? And how is then, because that makes all the difference in the world for many years to come. Now, question of evil and environment are very crucial questions. They are theological questions, philosophical questions, religious questions. And people often ask, if God is good, why is there evil in the world? And why is it a person like Hitler be born? Is it something in his genes? A few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, there was somebody on BBC trying to make a film about Hitler's childhood and trying to understand, is it his childhood? Is it his frustration? Is it the Treaty of Versailles that frustrated him? What made him what he was? And many people thought that these filmmakers were trying to bring a slightly compassionate understanding of this evil man, and that it should not be done. That there's nothing redeeming about him. And so that I don't think the film was finally made, but it was interesting that we look at this man who personifies evil in the 20th century to the hilt. The number of people he killed and the manner he killed and devastation he brought all over the world. So he became the symbol of evil. On the other hand, Mother Teresa, who died a few years ago, she was a nun who worked in India and was a person of great mercy and compassion. And so we wonder, where does this goodness come from? Is it again genetic? Is it something that is only uniquely hers? Or is it something that can be shared by other people? So these are questions that have theological, religious, and cultural implications. And we are very intrigued by it. And so we wonder, how does it happen? Now, before I come to this, we have had many complex and difficult attitude towards people who are disabled, particularly disabled mentally. Every society has had very difficult way of dealing with people who suffer from acute depression or schizophrenia or other mental diseases. And we wonder, many people still wonder, is it some sort of devil that possesses them? Is it some kind of evil spirit that is got into them? Now increasingly we say, well, perhaps it's something biochemical that happened, or it is something that happened in their childhood that needs to be addressed. So many theories have come about, but certainly our treatment of people who have suffered from mental diseases all over the world, it's not just in one country, all over the world, has been very difficult. And it's only recently that we're beginning to bring certain compassion and certain scientific understanding to these diseases. And how far we can go, we will see, we'll explore. And again, this idea of a person who's mentally not quite fully in his capacities, and how he's more or less put in a cage, so he's not a danger to other members of the society. Now, there are many people who have made all kinds of rather comical remarks about what is inherited, and people use excuses. What can I do? It's in my genes. I didn't do it. My genes made me do it. So earlier people would say, a devil made me do it. But my genes do it. Now, it might sound slightly a light-hearted way of looking at things, but it is a very crucial question in many cases, criminal cases in the law courts, where many defense lawyers try to say that what has been done by this person, by my client, is really beyond his will. It is not done with full intention, and it is because he was depressed, because he was suffering from some mental diseases or some other sources. So it was not his free act, and therefore he's not really fully guilty. So this comes up so many times in law courts as to at what stage are we responsible for our actions, particularly criminal actions. And if somehow it can be mitigated, that can be a cause for mitigation in certain cases. Now, here is an interesting, it says, but mommy, blaming my upbringing was just a trial tactic. And so these are, I present you these rather light-hearted cartoons here, essentially to say how it has this notion, who is responsible for our action, has filtered into our popular culture. We see it in films, we see it in Cuckoo's Nest, we see it in our many novels, and we see it in our plays, we see it in cartoons, because now it is being taught and become part of our popular culture as to who is responsible for our actions, and therefore who can be punished or who cannot be punished. And here is another example, where is the environment come in to what degree are we responsible, again, for our health? Because as I said, these questions of genes and environment and nature and nurture are crucial questions in our healthcare system, because we wonder, what is good health? Is it only is it inherited, or is it something we create into good health? And so, again, very, very important. So that brings us to this question of free will. Free will. All these things, what are the instincts? What are our inclinations? What are our temperaments? What are our tendencies and our habits? And whole idea of freedom. These are all constitute under free will. Many people now, many psychologists say, we really don't have free will. We are all robots of one kind or the other. Or our free will is only limited in certain ways. Or that we have only an illusion of freedom. That otherwise, most of the time, we are controlled. We just follow our habits. Or we follow others. But certainly, this idea, how much free will do we have? And under what circumstances do we have it? And how do we exercise it? And so on. So now, increasingly, everywhere, since the great advances in genetics and in biochemistry, people are talking about, are there genes for everything? Are there genes for people who are criminal? Is it some kind of gene that can be changed, that can be modified, and therefore criminal behavior can be altered? Or then are there genes, people talk of God gene. Very interesting that there is this notion that we have all societies, all through the ages, have had some idea of God. And say, why is it that this has gone on for so many thousands of years, this idea? Is there some kind of gene? And a book came out a few years ago, how God will not go away. Why God will not go away. And the idea and this whole book, the thesis was that it is in our genes, and therefore it can't go away. But I have found this rather a strange way of looking at the idea of God. But certainly this idea that is the God gene, and therefore there's a notion of faith or belief in God. Then there is a gay gene. People say, again, people who have a different sexual orientation. Many people said, is it you become gay because of your environment, because of the films that you saw, because of your associations, or whatever else? Or is it genetic? And if it is genetic, can it be altered? There are many people. I know one yoga teacher in India who has been proclaiming that he has certain yoga exercises that can turn gay people into straight people. So many people are arguing, is it again genetic? Is it part of your makeup? Or is it inherent? Same way, morality gene. Our genes are, where does our morality come from? Our ethics come from? And the question of language gene, I will talk about presently. And then talk happiness gene and shyness gene. Are you shy? And what makes certain people shy? So all these things are now being associated as though there can be a gene, a particular gene or set of genes can be located. And if we know that this gene is what makes people shy or nervous or are socially awkward, can that gene be altered, and therefore people can be cured? And this is in a way that the dream or a promise that many pharmaceutical companies are presenting, as though there is a pill for every ill. And that idea comes because we are biochemical beings. And again, a question that is being argued. So then we have, over the centuries, as I said, this idea of nature, nurture has been around for a long time. People have been asking, how does it happen? So we have said that the sins of the parents will be visited upon their children. So many people say, well, that's how a family is a good family, an honorable family, or a family that is shameful family, or you bring a certain inheritance. So we talk of how the sins of the parents will be visited upon their children. And this idea again, what goes around comes around. And as you sow, so shall you reap. So these are many ideas that we see in many cultures, in one way or the other. I think, why does it happen? And that's idea of God judgment. And then a book came out a few years ago called, Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People? I often ask, why do good things happen to bad people? So both ways. Why do things happen to what otherwise seems like a good person, a fine person, a kind person? Why do destructive things happen to him? Now, we know, for instance, Recently, about 10 days ago, there was an earthquake in Nepal. But history of earthquakes is very fascinating. In 1755, more than 250 years ago, there was a very large earthquake in Portugal, in Lisbon. And it happened on a very holy day, very fine. It was a All Saints' Day in Lisbon, and big celebration going on in the whole country. And then comes this earthquake, an absolute devastation of the whole city. And everybody at that time was sure that God is punishing them for some sins they have committed as a country. Indeed, they were committing some rather awful things in Brazil. Brazil was a colony of Portugal, and many people were committing some atrocities. And many people wondered if they are being punished for it. So where does the idea come? That nature has an intention. That nature or God has an intention, and if people are doing bad things here, they are being punished by certain natural disaster, in this case an earthquake. So it is this is also the beginning of age of enlightenment in Europe, and many scientists and philosophers said, no, we must look for natural causes for natural events. So this earthquake that happened has nothing to do with any intention of nature. It must be something that is happening in the earth itself that's causing it. And that is, in a way, the beginning of the science of seismology. Why do earthquakes occur? But every time an earthquake occurs, people wonder, why did it occur here? And why did my family die? And the family next door survived. This happened in 1934. There was similarly an earthquake in India, very large earthquake, 7.6 Richter scale. And it destroyed thousands of people. Now, this is the time when Mahatma Gandhi was the great leader of India, struggling for India's independence from the British. And he was, in many ways, he was a very learned man, but also a man of great orthodoxy, Hindu orthodoxy. And he said that we are being punished by God for practicing untouchability in our society. Now, this is a strange way of looking at how God would choose to punish certain people in certain area. And so many others, people like Nehru, the prime minister who became later the prime minister of the country, not look at nature having an intention in human affairs, so that nature does not have a mind of its own. It is a natural phenomena causing natural events. And so now last week, so when this event occurred in Nepal, I was quite amused in some ways to hear some people again talking, why is God punishing us? Why is God punishing us? As though really always, as there's some intention in nature why an event happens, whether it's a flood or a drought or an earthquake or a cyclone or a tsunami, are they being caused because of human doings or human actions that are being punished by some higher power? Now, so this now comes to this whole question of this idea of what is genetic and what is environment. Increasingly, we are finding, of course, there are many things that we see, our color of our skin, our hair, color of our hair, or how long we might live. But many times we also feel that many things are being changed by the environment. I give you two examples of it. In the last 100 years, in the beginning of 1900s, the average lifespan in the United States and the Western world, most Western countries, was under 40 years of age, 38 to 40 years of age. That was the life expectancy of most people in these countries. Now it's more than doubled. It's now in USA, Canada, it's 82 or 83 for men and 84 or 85 for women. This change that has come about in such a short period of time, in 100 years, that change did not come about because of biology. It came about because of culture, the kind of food we eat, the nutrition, and the environment we live in, the physical environment we breathe, the water we drink, the medical health that is available to us, and so on, and many ways of vaccinations of various kinds. So all these are human interventions in our body that has brought about biological change. But it is a biological change that has come about through cultural efforts, through cultural interventions. So we cannot say it is a biological evolution that caused it. No, it's cultural evolution that impacted on the biology. In a similar manner, we find increasingly that the age of puberty of girls in most countries is going down. There are now girls in many Western countries who reach a puberty at the age of 9 or 8, which is absolutely amazing. Earlier, about 100 years ago, average age of puberty was 15, 16, 17, and so it has come half of it. And again, this biological change that has come about is not because of biological factors, it is because of cultural interventions that have been caused. And so biological change caused by cultural factors, not the other way around. So we see this again increasingly. I mentioned this because I'm going to talk to you about how many emotional and mental changes are also occurring in a similar manner. So one of the most important things where nature and nurture come together. It's one of the most amazing phenomena of creation. Every human being, the very fact of definition of a human being, that he or she, as a child, doesn't matter whether he's born in Australia or in India or China or Mexico, the very definition of a human being, that child is capable of using a language. It is our gift. This is our human gift. Yesterday I talked about it. That distinguishes us so greatly from other creatures. Other creatures have quite complex means of communication. But our system of language is extraordinary. I have one full lecture on language later on, and I'll show you what makes it so unique and strange and remarkable. But the very fact that every human being is capable of using a language, and again, does not matter where he or she is born. But what language will he speak? Well, it depends what is spoken to him. So that is where the environment comes. If a child is spoken to, the language spoken to him by his parents and friends and neighborhoods and so on is Chinese, well, he speaks Chinese. And another person speaks English, another person speaks Spanish. So here is a wonderful example of nature, nurture coming together. Nature says, yes, we have the makeup, we have the genes, we have the structure of our whole body system, which says you are capable of, you have a capable of speaking a language. Now, which language we speak and even what accents we acquire, well, that depends what is spoken to us. Now, there have been some awful experiments in human history where some people said, what would it be like if we do not speak to a child at all? What would happen? Well, these days, fortunately, the bioethical constraints are such that such experiments will not be allowed. But they were done, and in which really literally children, 2 children went crazy. They went mad. Because there is nothing, they had the language, the skill is there, as though we had the power, the energy is there, but that energy is being expressed. Nothing is being spoken, nothing is being talked, is being expressed. So here is a remarkable example, as I said, language, acquiring a language. Which language? Some people, of course, learn 2 or 3 languages. I grew up in India where we had, in the family, we had 2, 3 languages spoken all the time. So it was not at all unusual for us to pick up 2, 3 languages. And there are other places where people use exclusively one language. But nevertheless, the gift for language is there, given to us by nature. Which language we speak, well, depends on what is spoken to us. That's where nurture comes in. And that's why, in a way, how every society encourages to mothers and fathers now, say, speak to your children, sing to them, read a story to them in bed, because that is really opening up the mind. It's the environment coming and opening up the mind. Yesterday I mentioned how human beings are so special because we have the longest childhood. Our childhood continues because we are growing not only physically, but also mentally, culturally, spiritually. We are growing. And that childhood continues. We are learning animals. We keep learning all our lives. And when we stop learning in a way, we say, well, we sort of start dying. But so learning goes on in our lives all through. And what is, again, very special about human beings, when in the first year of human birth, the human brain increases by 300%. It grows by 300%. The size of the head grows because it has, again, biologically, it could not pass through the birthing canal. The mother will die because if the head was as large as it becomes later on. So the head is small when it's passing through the birthing canal. But in the very first year, in 1 year, that's why first year is so crucial. So crucial. So many for food, proper care, proper love, proper nurturing. So crucial that first year is the time when a child is growing because her brain is growing 300%. Amazing. And the size of the head is growing, changing. So it is in this context that the languages become so crucial, so crucial. And is always cited as a remarkable example of nature and nurture coming together. And we cannot say that it's only one or the other, because if we do not have the gift of learning a language, you can speak any set of languages we want. You can speak to a dog in English, and people speak to their pets in English, and I always wonder how much they are understanding. But really, that is the great gift. Now, I give you an example where people did some awful things about language. And it's an example which has come to be known as a monster experiment. Monster experiment in stuttering. There was a professor of psychology at the University of Iowa in USA who stuttered. And he was quite embarrassed about it because he later on became a professor and a very good teacher and a good professor and everything very fine. But he was quite obsessed with this thing. He was quite obsessed that stuttering is not inherited. It is learned. It is environmental. And so he set out to do an experiment, which has come to be considered as one of the most awful experiments in psychology. This is way back in 1939, so it's more than 70 years ago. He took a group of children, 22 children, from an orphanage in Iowa. Now, again, this sort of experiment will not be allowed today and should not be allowed anywhere in the world. This is awful. This is atrocious. But it was not, at that time, we didn't have such ethical standards in experimentation. So he took a group of 22 students, 22 children, in an orphanage in Iowa. And these children were orphans. That means they had, they were essentially being taken care of, and they were vulnerable. They had no parents, so all the vulnerability that goes in that situation. And so he took these 22 students and kids, and he said, he divided into two groups. One, a group 11, another group of another 11. And he said, this group of 11, one group, will be, any time they spoke, they will be always encouraged and patted and so, oh, wow, what wonderful speech. You speak so well. You're so eloquent. You're so wonderful. You're so creative with your words. And the other group of 11, his assistant would say, you don't know how to speak. Look, you don't speak. You speak so awfully. You speak awkwardly. You're stuttering. And indeed, after 3 years, these second group of people, kids, they became stutterers. And they became stutterers for the rest of their lives. And it was only in year 2001, remember, over 60 years later, that the president of the university expressed apologies. Most of these people had died by that time. They expressed apologies, saying that this is shameful what was done. But what it does, and since then it has, in those who study speech pathology and why certain things happen, why certain people speak so well, the others do not speak so well, etc. Speech pathology. And so this has come to be called as a monster experiment in psychology. It's not my term. It's a term that is used in much of literature. Say it's a monster experiment. So here is another example how things can, in our attempt to find out, is it the environment or is it the inherited in our genes? So this experiment was done. As I said, these 11 children became stutterers because they were constantly being told that their speech is bad, that they cannot speak. So negative reinforcement, if you like. And the other group of people were being positive. So this has become very crucial in education, how we can destroy people's self-esteem, their sense of self, their sense of self-respect, and by giving negative reinforcement. And that's why in education, as anybody who's as a teacher or school, or all of us have been parents or grandparents, saying how important it is what we say to our children. Because in a way, we become the symbols of authority, and they imbibe from us what they think is their self-image. Are they handsome? Are they beautiful? Are they smart? Are they intelligent? Are they dull? Are they stupid? Are they idiots? And so on and so on. So we can, by this sense of reinforcement of one kind or the other, this became in psychology an area called behaviorism. Behaviorism is that mind is like a clean slate, and one can implant anything on it. It's not an idea that all psychologists agree with now, but certainly it was a very powerful branch of psychology called behaviorism, in which the idea was that really anything can be planted. A mind is an empty slate, and anything can be written on it. And this particular experiment here that I talk about to you is a very good example of how things went wrong. Now, another question that comes up again and again: is violence in our genes? We all know that violence has gone on in human society for a very long time, and it still continues. And many people feel, well, if it has been going on for so long, surely it must be part of human nature. And what is human nature? We say, what is human nature? Well, it must be part of our makeup. It must be our part of our biology. But I question it. I have been questioning it for some time. I say, is it violence or is it love in our genes? And is it the environment that teaches us to be violent? Or is it encourages it? Are the wars, why are the wars? And who causes it? What are the factors that caused it? And surely this is a good time to reflect on it, because it was 100 years ago, in year 1915, that the First World War started. First World War started. It was the most cruel, most devastating war in the human history at that time. I know, talking yesterday to some of you, some friends on my dining table, they said as many as 500,000 Australians were sent to fight for the war. And I discovered recently on my visit to India that 1.5 million Indian people from India went to fight for the British Raj, for the British Empire in Europe. And many thousands of them died. So it was a war that was supposed to end all wars, but it didn't end all wars. 20 years later, another war started. So, but nevertheless, the question was being asked, still being asked. Good question. Why is the war? Why is it part of human nature? Now, there is increasingly many more people questioning that what are the causes of war. Earlier, in many departments in the world, people were learning defense strategies and fighting war strategies and training them for wars and so on. Now, increasingly, in many universities, certainly in Canada, we have departments of peace studies. How to create peace? How can it be created at home, in communities, in families, among us nations? And so if a whole attempt is being made to turn around our values and attitudes, perhaps there is a certain hope. There is a book that came out by Steven Pinker. He is a famous psychologist at Harvard University and a very good writer. And this book called Better Angels of Our Nature. I had the privilege of meeting Steven at a conference in India 2 years ago. And in our conversation, his thesis is that over the millennia and over a long period of time, he has studied the whole human behavior over 100,000 years, that actually violence is going down. He says it seems odd to say, having in the two world wars in the 20th century, and how much wars and how much violence still goes on. But he says how people killed each other for the smallest reason and most smallest of provocations, and how people were hanged for stealing a little basket or half a pound of money, and so on. So his thesis is that it is going down. And he says, and thesis works on this, that many questions of justice and law have actually made people less prone to fighting with each other and sense of revenge, and more attempts to resolve our conflicts in a more peaceful way. Now, I feel many times the thesis is an interesting thesis, but also now we know that so much money is involved in weapons. All members of the Security Council in the United Nations, they're all merchants of death. They all sell weapons on a grand scale. And weapon industry is one of the biggest industries in the world. So so much war is not just a question of anger or resolving conflicts. It has become a big, huge military-industrial complex. So indeed, question like this, we begin to say, is it violence in our genes, or is it love in our genes? And how it can be promoted, and who promotes it? And how do our films do it? Do our music do it? Our parents, our education, our systems? Or do we begin to condemn war as an awful, destructive way of resolving conflicts? Now, we now know how sometimes in the Middle East or certain communities and certain societies, we feel that they are given to certain attitudes which are, we find for good reasons, as uncivilized, that unthoughtful, silly, destructive, and we condemn them. We should condemn them, because increasingly we find that violence is passé. It is beastly. It is not very civilized behavior. Now, let me remind you, for good reasons, that Europe used to have so many wars. There was hardly a period of more than 30 years of peace in European history over the last 1,000 years. But now, since the end of the Second World War in 1945, it's almost 70 years now. Now, since the end of that war, Europe has not had a war. It's the longest period in European history, except in Yugoslavia, for that's a different kind of war. So except for that, Europe has not had a war. So immediately you begin to think, well, where is the source of war? Is it again part of our nature, human nature, or is it somewhere else? So again, other example I give to you is that there are many cities in the world, which are large cities, which have very small criminal rate, crime in their country, in their cities. City like Tokyo, a city of 20 million people, has the lowest crime rate in the world. Whereas other cities in USA, Chicago, Philadelphia, New York, Los Angeles, their rates of crime are much higher than almost anywhere else in the world of that size of city. So you wonder, is it the behavior of people? Is it in our genes? Or is it something else that is causing it? So these questions are important questions and are being raised and should be raised. Now, people have, over the centuries, also talked about that has our civilization made us more on the surface civilized, but deep down has really only aggravated our baser instincts. And there is the idea of noble savage. It's started, it has gone on in many societies, French societies and British societies. But idea that perhaps earlier people, of people who had less civilization or urban life, that perhaps they were nobler, they were gentler, they lived more in harmony. It could be romanticized. As we will visit Tahiti, one of the great French painters who went there, Tahiti, and lived there for many years, was Paul Gauguin. And he was very much taken by Tahiti, and he romanticized about its and great beauty. He painted it extensively. I showed you a painting of his yesterday, and he was very much of the belief that this rather primitive society was far nobler, far gentler, far kinder than what he had come from in France, which he thought was very much in the midst of a new kind of barbarism in the 19th century. So anyhow, these are questions that people ask often, as has civilization made us more civilized? So there is a whole politics of human nature. People have questioned, what is human nature? because many times we say, well, we justify many behavior, certain kinds of behavior. So, well, that's part of human nature. But really, human nature has been evolving, has been changing. And what we consider human nature, and how, and then what is, we say, has been inherited genetically or ancestrally, because the word genes is a new word. It's only, genetics is only about 100 years old. It started discovery about the beginning of 1900s. Even Darwin did not know anything about genes. So it's a new idea, but certainly a great idea, a grand idea, and it's taken hold of our scientific and other imagination to a very large extent. So, but otherwise, the idea, what is human nature and the politics of it? Are humans sinful? Are they bad? Are they fallen? Is it part of human nature? Or are we noble? Are we kind? We can be gentle? We can be cooperative? We can work with each other? We can be compassionate and sympathetic? So we need to say, certain religions seem to say, well, we are by nature, we are fallen beings. We are sinful. And there are other countries, other cultures say, no, by nature we are noble. But we become sinful as we live because of the environment, because of the culture, and so on. So it's not all one set of ideas that have filtered down to us. Same way, questions of selfishness and altruism. These are being studied now in psychology, a great deal. What makes us selfish? Now, every society, in every country, people, nobody likes selfish people. What is the selfish person? A person who is self-centered, who cares only for himself, does not care for his brother or son or father or wife or children and so on. So it's self-centered people. And everywhere, in every society, throughout the ages, people like people who are generous, who are kind, who help each other, who go out of their way to do things for others. So as a whole, we'll say these are the people who we consider sort of heroes, people who reach out for others. And there was a book that came out a few years ago by Richard Dawkins called Selfish Gene in 1973. And the whole idea is that even at the genetic level, at the gene level, there is a selfishness. I wrote a rejoinder to that book, and I said, well, that really life cannot live if it is entirely selfish. It cannot survive, because the whole idea of life is cooperation. Because we cooperate with our children, with our brothers, in all living organisms. Now, there's a cooperation going on. And yesterday I showed you a little picture of the turtles, how the story of turtles taking care of the eggs and the little one is absolutely extraordinary in nature. So life could not survive if it was selfish. Yet there are, of course, certain behavior patterns we see in our human societies as well, when people are selfish and then they get away with it. But nobody, as far as I know, no society likes selfish people, because they feel the selfish people just care only for themselves. Now, so question, is creativity inherited? And how is it that some people are wonderful musicians, some people are great artists, some people are great orators? And say, is creativity, what is creativity? Tomorrow I'm going to speak to you, how intelligent are we? And in what ways are you intelligent? So the question is, creativity, in what ways are we creative? A lot of people are wonderfully creative in a kitchen, what they do with food. And there are other people who are wonderfully creative on a canvas. So creativity has many expressions. So we wonder, is it inherited? A person who's a great artist, will his son be a great artist? Was Einstein's son was a great scientist? No, he was not. Did Darwin's children became great scientists? No, they did not. So we say, is it inherited? The question of what is inherited. So is intelligence inherited? Again, question. Very important questions. So now what is happening? Is they're designing human nature in the laboratory. That we can have a pill that can design, that can recreate, redesign the genetics. There is a sort of idea that there is a pill for every ill. And now increasingly, big debate going on, good debate, that people who are suffering from depression, which is the most pervasive disease in the world, is it to be cured through pharmaceutical ways or through other ways, through maybe meditation, through mindfulness, through different thoughts, through different ways of living, through exercises, through food? Or is it to be, you take a pill and you'll be not depressed? So last year, 2 years ago, I was in India, and there was a big headlines all over in all newspapers in India that 35% of India's population is depressed. Now, India has a population of 1.2 billion people. 35% is over 450 million people. Now, think of it. Pharmaceutical companies will have a great time if 450 million people were on drugs. And so we later discovered that it was actually a planted news by pharmaceutical companies. And so you find that there is a big, huge struggle going on. What is it in our heads, and what is it that we can change and take control of our own lives? So this question is, we talk all the time, we change our minds. I changed my mind. I don't want to buy this house. I changed my mind. Or I changed my mind. I don't want to go to see the film. Or I changed my mind. I don't want to read this book. So the question is, can we change our brains? Yes, we can. In fact, brain is a very plastic thing. It is changing, and the word that is being used is called epigenetic, that genes are not fixed. They are changing. They can change. Thoughts can change. Meditation can change. Good feelings can change. Good emotions can change. And so many new books coming out, how the brain changes itself. So increasingly, we are discovering that how what we are, what we think, all that we arises, our thoughts, are all part of our notion of change. And where does this change come from? Now, let me finish by telling a little story. I'll take a couple of minutes only. I was with my daughter, who was 8.5 years old, two daughters with my 11-year-old daughter and 8.5-year-old daughter, in Disney World in year 2000. And we were watching this show called Honey, I Shrunk the Audience. I don't know if anybody's seen it. It's an awful horror show. You put special glasses on, and then you see this show what goes on for about 12 minutes, and the snakes come, and they're all over your body, and the dogs come, and they fight you and bite you, and everybody's screaming, and awful situation. But everybody's sort of enjoying it because that's what they're paid for. So we were also screaming, myself, my older daughter, 11-year-old daughter, and we're screaming our heads off, and you could feel the goose pimples on our skin. And you could really feel that it was real. It was real, as we called reality to be. And then I turned to my other daughter, 8.5-year-old daughter. I said, Ankita, how come you were not screaming? He says, Dad, I just took my glasses off. And I thought, what a wonderful, wise thing to do. All of us have certain glasses that we wear. And if we learn how to take them off, what kind of glasses that make us feel anxious, fearful, make us afraid, make us feel anxiety-ridden? So we all have these glasses. And if we learned how to take them off and wear a different kind of glasses, that creates a new reality. They turn it off for me. Thank you very much.